Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Have you ever thought about how Lord Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard of all time, was actually his own worst enemy? What if the Dark Lord's downfall wasn't just the result of Harry Potter's bravery, but a series of his own foolish mistakes? In today's video, you will find out the biggest blunders that made Voldemort lose everything. Voldemort was a mastermind of dark magic, but his arrogance clouded his judgment. He made reckless decisions that ultimately sealed his fate. Take the creation of Horcruxes, for example. Splitting his soul was a brilliant idea for immortality, but why hide the fragments in such obvious places? Instead of using ordinary, untraceable objects and burying them deep underground or launching them into space, he chose legendary artifacts, each with a paper trail. Worse, he placed them in locations that, while well protected, were still accessible to his enemies. Harry might have struggled, but he found them all in the end. Then there was his ignorance about house elf magic. He thought he had locked the locket Horcrux away forever, forcing Creature to drink a deadly potion to protect it. Yet he overlooked the simple fact that house elves possess unique magic that defies wizarding spells. Creature escaped, and this small miscalculation played a part in Voldemort's ultimate defeat. His overconfidence in Hogwarts' secrecy also worked against him. He assumed he was the only one who had truly discovered the castle's mysteries. Confident that the Room of Requirement was an impenetrable hiding spot, he never considered that hundreds of students had used it before him, including Draco Malfoy and Harry himself. Instead of relocating the diadem when he realized Harry was hunting Horcruxes, he left it there, unguarded. And what about his choice to entrust Lucius Malfoy with the diary? This wasn't just any diary, it contained a piece of his very soul. Yet Voldemort handed it off like a disposable pawn. Lucius, acting in his own self-interest, used it to further his political ambitions, leading to its destruction long before Voldemort could retrieve it. The loss of that Horcrux weakened him forever. Perhaps the greatest irony of all was his obsession with the prophecy. If he had simply ignored it, nothing would have happened. But by targeting Harry, he set the entire chain of events in motion. Dumbledore even pointed out that prophecies only hold power if people act on them. Voldemort's paranoia turned a vague prediction into a self-fulfilling disaster. His pursuit of the Elder Wand was another fatal error. He was convinced that possessing the wand would make him invincible, yet he failed to understand how wand loyalty worked. He wrongly assumed killing Snape would make him the wand's true master, when in reality it had already shifted allegiance to Harry. His lack of knowledge led him to wield a weapon that ultimately betrayed him. Even in his final moments, his blind trust in others proved to be his undoing. When he thought he had killed Harry in the Forbidden Forest, he left the confirmation to Narcissa Malfoy. She had her own priorities, her son's safety, and deceived him without hesitation. A simple verification spell could have exposed the lie, but Voldemort never bothered to check.
And what about Snape? Voldemort was infamous for his paranoia, yet he blindly trusted the one person who had every reason to betray him. He dismissed Snape's love for Lily as meaningless, never realizing that his most loyal Death Eater was feeding information to Dumbledore all along.
Voldemort's downfall wasn't just about Harry's determination, it was his own arrogance, miscalculations, and blind spots that led to his ruin. He might have been a powerful wizard, but in the end he was outwitted by his own mistakes. Voldemort stood over Harry's lifeless body in the Forbidden Forest. The moment he had dreamed of for years had finally come. The boy who lived was no more. The forest was silent. Death Eaters watched in stunned reverence. Nagini coiled nearby, hissing softly. And yet, in this moment of triumph, Voldemort made his most foolish mistake. He assumed A real strategist, a true master of war, would have checked, would have confirmed. A simple spell could have told him if there was any life left in Potter's body. But Voldemort, blinded by his own ego, didn't even consider the possibility that Harry might have survived. He had cast Avada Kedavra. That was enough, or so he thought. Bellatrix Lestrange, standing just behind him, watched the scene unfold. Her lips curled in a delighted smirk. But even she, his most devoted follower, seemed tense. Why wasn't the Dark Lord verifying his kill? Why wasn't he ensuring that this moment, this victory, was real? Bellatrix, of all people, knew how many times Potter had escaped death. And then the truly baffling part. Voldemort didn't fire another spell. No second Avada Kedavra, no Cruciatus, just to be sure. He simply turned his back, his focus already shifting to his next move. This arrogance would cost him everything. The Death Eaters gathered, circling Voldemort in eerie silence. No one dared to question him. None of them stepped forward to inspect the body. Draco Malfoy's mother, Narcissa, was the only one to approach. She kneeled beside Harry, her blonde hair falling forward like a curtain between them and the rest of the world. She whispered the words that changed everything. "Is Draco alive?" Harry, still and silent, heard her, and he answered. A mother's love overruled fear. Narcissa turned back to Voldemort and declared, "He is dead." With those words, the battle should have been over. The Dark Lord's triumph was complete. He had won, or so he thought. They carried Harry back to Hogwarts like a war prize. Voldemort at the front, radiating triumph. The crowd gasped as they saw the lifeless body of their hero. For the first time, true despair filled the castle walls. McGonagall's face was pale. Ron and Hermione looked shattered. Ginny's sobs broke through the silence. But then the impossible happened.
Harry moved.
Not in some grand, dramatic flourish, but enough. He was alive. He had never been dead. And Voldemort had no idea. Had the Dark Lord been more cautious, had he used even the simplest hominum revelio or vitali revelio, the truth would have been revealed. But Voldemort did not believe he needed confirmation. He believed in his own infallibility. That belief was his greatest weakness. Harry's survival was no accident. The Elder Wand, the one Voldemort held so confidently in his grasp, refused to harm its true master. The spell had backfired in a way Voldemort could not comprehend. He had been so consumed with possessing the wand that he never stopped to ask why it hadn't worked against Potter before. The moment of revelation came too late. When Harry revealed himself, chaos erupted. Voldemort's face twisted in disbelief. This was impossible. He had won. He had killed Potter. Panic set in. The battle resumed. Voldemort fought harder than ever, but doubt crept into his every move. His followers saw it too. A god cannot bleed, and yet their Dark Lord had failed. The duel with Harry was inevitable. Voldemort tried every spell he knew, but none mattered. His own arrogance had given Harry the one thing he needed: hope. And hope is a dangerous thing. The final moment came swiftly. Voldemort raised the Elder Wand, but the wand refused him. Harry's Expelliarmus met Voldemort's killing curse in mid-air, and the unthinkable happened. The green light rebounded, the Dark Lord crumpled, dead, for real this time. All because he had assumed, had he simply checked, had he made sure, history would have been different. But Voldemort never doubted himself, and that, in the end, was what truly destroyed him. Voldemort was not a man of contingency plans. He saw himself as invincible, above failure, beyond the need for backup strategies. Every great leader, every true strategist, prepares for the worst, but not him. He believed in only one path, victory. And when that path crumbled beneath his feet, he had nowhere to run. His entire existence revolved around domination. He did not build safety nets, did not forge escape routes, did not create a secret haven to retreat to if things went wrong. He poured everything into the idea that he could not be defeated. That was his first mistake. The moment he heard that his Horcruxes were being destroyed, he should have disappeared. He should have hidden, regrouped, and found a way to create new ones. He should have sent his Death Eaters to scatter, to lay low, to prepare for a new rise. Instead, he stood there, paralyzed by disbelief, watching as everything he had built crumbled. He had poured so much into his Horcruxes, believing they made him untouchable, yet he did nothing to reinforce their security when he realized they were under attack. He did not move them. He did not double their protections. He did not send his most loyal followers to defend them. He simply hoped they would remain hidden. Hope. That was his plan. Dumbledore had warned Harry long ago. Voldemort's mistake is that he does not understand love. But just as dangerous was the fact that Voldemort did not understand fear. He had never truly been afraid, and so he had never prepared for the possibility of losing. Even as his empire fell apart, he did not run. He did not hide. He stormed straight into Hogwarts, demanding submission, believing he could still win through sheer terror alone. Even when Harry walked out of the forest alive, even when his followers began to waver, Voldemort refused to acknowledge reality. A smarter man would have disappeared in that moment. A smarter man would have melted into the shadows, waiting for a new opportunity, rebuilding in silence. But Voldemort had built his entire legend on fear. To vanish was to admit weakness. And so he stayed. Bellatrix knew better. Her eyes darted around as the tide turned. The Death Eaters faltered, watching their master with doubt. They saw the cracks forming. They saw the fear Voldemort tried to hide. And fear, once tasted, spreads like wildfire. The moment his final Horcrux was destroyed, Voldemort felt it. A wrenching emptiness, a hollow absence where once there had been invincibility. He staggered. He gasped. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of mortality pressing down upon him. And yet even then, he did not flee. The Dark Lord had no contingency plan because he had never believed he needed one. He had no safe house, no hidden sanctuary, no trusted second-in-command to carry on his mission. His empire existed solely on the illusion of his eternal presence. When that presence faltered, everything collapsed. He could have left the battlefield. He could have faked his own death. He could have used Polyjuice Potion to become someone else. He could have disappeared, learned from his mistakes, built himself up again. But Voldemort was not built for patience. His obsession with power had left him blind to survival. He had burned every bridge, left no allies truly loyal beyond fear, created no backup plan for his inevitable downfall. And so, when the moment came, he stood alone. Harry did not defeat a god that night. He defeated a man too arrogant to plan for failure. Voldemort had spent his life trying to escape death, but in the end, it wasn't death that claimed him. It was his own refusal to believe it could. Voldemort never understood love. He dismissed it as weakness, an obstacle, a distraction that made people vulnerable, but that was his greatest mistake. Love was not a weakness. It was the one force he could never control, never conquer, and never destroy. and in the end it was love that defeated him. Dumbledore had warned him long ago, though Voldemort never listened. Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. That had always been the Dark Lord's curse. He lived without love, and so he never understood its power. He thought power came from fear, but fear crumbles when faced with something stronger. Lily Potter's sacrifice should have been his first lesson. She did what no amount of dark magic could counter. She gave her life freely, without hesitation, out of pure love. That kind of magic was something Voldemort could never grasp. He knew spells, curses, enchantments, but this was beyond his understanding. When his killing curse rebounded that night in Godric's Hollow, he should have realized he was up against something he did not comprehend. Instead, he saw it as a fluke, an anomaly, and so he made the same mistake again and again. When he returned to power, he did not question why Harry had survived. He did not wonder how Dumbledore had kept the boy safe. He did not consider that love, whether a mother's love, a friend's loyalty, or the bonds that tied people together, was an unbreakable shield. He relied on fear, intimidation, and cruelty. He ruled through terror, never seeing that love creates devotion, and devotion inspires courage. Narcissa Malfoy was another lesson he refused to learn. She was a Death Eater's wife, mother to a boy Voldemort saw as his tool. She had knelt before him, pretended to be loyal, yet when the moment of truth came, her love for Draco outweighed her fear of the Dark Lord. With one simple act, checking if Harry was alive and then lying about it, she turned the tide of the battle. And Voldemort, so convinced of his own power, never saw it coming. Had he known love, he might have understood why Snape betrayed him. He saw Snape as useful, a skilled spy, a ruthless follower. But Snape had never followed him out of loyalty. His devotion had been to Lily Potter, to the only person he had ever loved. Voldemort never realized that love could create oaths stronger than fear. And so he let a traitor live under his nose for years. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, his most devoted servant, was not loyal in the way he thought. She worshipped him, yes, but her love was twisted, obsessive, driven by her own desires rather than true loyalty. Had Voldemort understood love, he would have known that true loyalty does not come from power alone. It must be earned. Harry was not the most powerful wizard. He was not the most skilled. He made mistakes. He failed. He doubted himself. But he had something Voldemort never had. People who loved him. Ron and Hermione had followed him to hell and back, risking their lives at every step. The Order of the Phoenix fought for him, not because they feared him, but because they believed in him. Voldemort's forces were different. His Death Eaters obeyed because they were terrified. They bowed to him because they had no choice. The moment his power wavered, they hesitated. They fled. They betrayed him. Because fear is not loyalty. Fear breaks. Love endures. Dumbledore had planned for this from the beginning. He knew Voldemort's flaw. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He built Harry's protection on love, knowing it was the one thing the Dark Lord would never anticipate. The moment love triumphed was not when Harry cast the final spell. It was earlier. It was when the students of Hogwarts stood against Voldemort, refusing to let him take their home. It was when mothers and fathers, teachers and students fought together side by side while Voldemort's army was held together only by fear. And in that final moment, when Voldemort faced Harry for the last time, the truth was clear. Voldemort stood alone. No one stood by his side. No one fought for him out of love. And Harry He had the entire castle behind him. The killing curse met the disarming spell. The Elder Wand rejected its false master, and Voldemort, the greatest dark wizard of all time, fell.
Not to power, not to brute strength, but to love.
Voldemort surrounded himself with the wrong kind of people. He did not value intelligence, strategy, or true loyalty. He valued fear. His inner circle was not made up of strong leaders, but of sycophants, cowards, and fanatics, people who would never dare to challenge him but also could not be relied upon in moments of crisis. And that cost him everything. Bellatrix Lestrange was his most devoted follower. She worshipped him with a twisted, obsessive devotion. But loyalty born from obsession is not the same as loyalty born from trust. Bellatrix was reckless, violent, and impulsive. She acted without thinking, without planning, and often without considering the consequences. She was the one who tortured the Longbottoms into insanity, turning their son Neville into a future warrior against Voldemort. She was the one who killed Sirius Black in a moment of careless overconfidence. And she was the one who laughed as she taunted Molly Weasley right before she was struck down. Lucius Malfoy was a man who enjoyed power but never truly wanted to risk anything for it. He was happy to be Voldemort's ally when the Dark Lord was winning, but when things turned against him, his fear consumed him. He failed to protect the Diary Horcrux. He failed in the Department of Mysteries. He lost his home, his wealth, and Voldemort's trust. In the final battle, he abandoned the fight entirely to search for Draco, proving that in the end his loyalty was not to the Dark Lord, but to his own family. And then there was Peter Pettigrew, a pathetic, snivelling coward who had once been a follower of James Potter, Sirius Black, and Remus Lupin. He betrayed them all, yet Voldemort thought such a man could be trusted. Pettigrew was never truly loyal. He followed only out of fear. And fear does not make someone reliable. When given the chance, he hesitated. When he had Harry Potter at his mercy, he faltered. His silver hand, a gift from Voldemort, turned on him in the end, because even Voldemort's magic knew that a traitor would always be a traitor. Even Severus Snape, perhaps the most competent of them all, was never truly Voldemort's. He was a spy, a double agent, working for Dumbledore from the start. And yet Voldemort, in all his supposed brilliance, never saw it. He believed Snape was his loyal servant, never realizing that everything Snape did was for Lily Potter. Voldemort did not inspire real devotion. He ruled through terror. And terror does not create strong bonds. It creates desperation. His followers obeyed out of fear of death, but when it became clear he was losing, they abandoned him. They ran. They switched sides. Some, like the Malfoys, simply walked away. Others, like the Snatchers, turned on their own. Contrast that with Harry. He was not the strongest wizard, he was not the most experienced. But people followed him because they believed in him. They fought for him because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. That is why the Order of the Phoenix stood together until the end. That is why the students of Hogwarts fought. That is why Neville Longbottom, with nothing but courage and a sword, stood up to Voldemort when no one else could. A leader is only as strong as the people around him. Voldemort had every opportunity to surround himself with powerful, competent allies, but he didn't. He crushed potential threats instead of making them his allies. He surrounded himself with cowards and fanatics. He built an empire on fear, and when that fear was no longer enough, his empire collapsed. When Voldemort fell in the Great Hall, no one rushed to his aid. No one tried to protect him. No one mourned him. He died alone, abandoned by the very people he had once commanded, because fear does not inspire loyalty, and in the end he had no one left. Voldemort could have killed Harry 100 times over. He had so many opportunities, yet he wasted them all. Why? Because it was never just about killing Harry. It was about winning. It was about proving, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he was superior. And in his obsession with a grand victory, he let his enemy slip through his fingers again and again. It started the night he came for the Potters. He could have killed baby Harry instantly, without warning, without giving Lily a chance to intervene. But he wanted her to move aside, to beg, to submit. That moment of indulgence, of drawing out his own superiority, cost him everything. Years later, when Quirrell had Harry trapped in the dungeons of Hogwarts, Voldemort had another chance. Quirrell, possessing magic beyond a child's ability to fight, could have killed him outright. But no, Voldemort wanted the stone first. He wanted to gloat, to make Harry understand who had beaten him, and in that delay he lost. Again. The Chamber of Secrets? Another failure. He had left behind a powerful weapon, a basilisk, a diary horcrux, a means of returning. And yet he relied on a schoolgirl to complete his plan, rather than taking control himself. Had he found another way, a way that did not hinge on an 11-year-old's ability to complete his task, Harry might never have made it out alive. Then came the Triwizard Tournament. This should have been the moment, the perfect plan. A year-long scheme, carefully orchestrated, all to bring Harry to a graveyard where he could die at Voldemort's hands. But even then it wasn't enough. Voldemort could have killed him instantly. The moment Harry landed on the cold stone, wandless, confused, terrified, it could have ended. But Voldemort wanted a show. He wanted Harry to see him rise. He wanted his Death Eaters to witness his return in all its glory. He wanted a duel, a contest, a spectacle. He gave Harry back his wand. He let him stand, gave him time to process what was happening, to prepare to fight back. And that was his undoing. The Priori Incantatem was an accident, a fluke, but it only happened because Voldemort let it. Had he cast a silent curse instead of shouting his attack, had he chosen any number of lethal spells besides Avada Kedavra, had he not given Harry time, he would have won. But Voldemort did not want victory. He wanted dominance. He wanted to break Harry before killing him. And time again, that need for a personal, dramatic victory became his downfall. Even in the department of mysteries, he could have simply ambushed Harry. Instead, he let others take the lead. He let Bellatrix, Lucius, and the others chase Harry through the corridors. And when he finally stepped in, when he could have ended it, he wasted time taunting Dumbledore, throwing spells to show off, rather than finishing it. When he learned of the prophecy, he did not try to steal it himself. He sent children into battle. He relied on others to do the dirty work. He waited until it was too late, and then he was forced to flee. And in the final war, when the stakes had never been higher, he made the same mistakes again. He did not simply overwhelm Hogwarts. He did not send in his full forces at once. He toyed with them. He waited outside the castle, giving his enemies time to prepare. He offered mercy, expecting submission. He walked into the forbidden forest expecting Harry to come to him. And when he thought he had won, when Harry lay unmoving at his feet, he did not check. He did not confirm. He did not finish it.
A great general would have crushed his enemy when he had the chance. A true tactician would have ensured Harry's death before moving on. But Voldemort wasn't interested in a simple kill. He wanted to stand above Harry's corpse and have the world see.
And that was his greatest mistake. He could have won. He could have been unstoppable, but he needed the spectacle, the grandeur, the moment. He wanted an audience. He wanted a legend. And in doing so, He gave Harry exactly what he needed to win. Voldemort never understood the power of friendship. He never had real friends. He surrounded himself with followers, servants, and sycophants, but never with people who truly cared for him. He thought power was measured by fear, that strength came from ruling alone, and that belief was what destroyed him. From the beginning, he underestimated what true loyalty meant. When he first met Harry, he assumed the boy was weak. He believed that without Dumbledore, without guidance, Harry would break. But he never realized that Harry had something far stronger than power. He had friends who would never leave his side. Ron and Hermione were his greatest weapons, though Voldemort never saw them that way. He thought of Ron as a foolish boy, a shadow behind Harry. He saw Hermione as just another mudblood, unworthy of his attention. But those two alone carried Harry through more battles than any spell could. They faced dangers alongside him that Voldemort's followers would have never endured. When the trio infiltrated the Ministry, they stood together. When they ran from the Snatchers, they stood together. When they were hunted across Britain through forests, caves, and ruins, they stood together. Voldemort's followers, meanwhile, betrayed each other at every turn. Bellatrix mocked Snape the moment she had the chance. Lucius abandoned Voldemort when Draco's life was at stake. Pettigrew, weak and spineless, hesitated when he had the chance to kill Harry. There was no trust among them, only fear. The final battle was where Voldemort's failure became undeniable. He came to Hogwarts believing he would win easily. He stood before the castle, certain that his victory was inevitable. But when the battle began, he saw something he had never expected. People fighting for each other. The students did not run. They stood their ground. Professors, parents, old allies, and new fighters. All of them fought not just for Harry, but for each other. Voldemort's army fought only because they were ordered to. The moment things went wrong, they panicked. Neville Longbottom, a boy Voldemort had barely acknowledged, stood before him and did something unthinkable. He defied him. With a burning sword in hand, Neville faced the most feared wizard of all time. He did not hesitate. He did not kneel. He fought. In the chaos, Voldemort saw what true loyalty meant. He saw McGonagall protecting her students, Kingsley Shacklebolt holding the line, Molly Weasley avenging her fallen son. He saw the Order of the Phoenix fighting for something more than survival. They fought for each other. And then his own forces turned. The Malfoys fled. The Giants hesitated. His followers realized something he never did. Fear is a weak bond. Fear does not inspire sacrifice. Fear crumbles under pressure. By the time Harry faced Voldemort for the last time, the Dark Lord was already alone. His allies were gone. His army was broken. He had lost long before the final spell was cast. Harry did not win because he was the strongest wizard. He won because he had people who believed in him. He won because he never stood alone.
Voldemort lost because he never understood that power is not measured by fear, but by the strength of those who stand by you. And when the dust settled, the Dark Lord was left with nothing. No friends, no allies, no power.
Just a broken man falling alone. Voldemort never valued knowledge beyond what he believed would make him more powerful. He saw information as a tool, but only in the most direct sense. Spells, curses, forbidden magic. Anything outside of that was irrelevant. He ignored history, he ignored strategy, he ignored the subtle complexities that made a truly great leader. And in the end, it was ignorance, not weakness, that destroyed him. Dumbledore, by contrast, was a seeker of knowledge. He understood that power was not just about spells and duels, but about understanding people, history, and the future. That was why he was always 2 steps ahead of Voldemort. Because he knew things Voldemort did not care to learn. One of Voldemort's greatest failures was his refusal to understand Lily Potter's sacrifice. The night he killed her, he saw nothing but an inconvenience, another obstacle in his path to immortality. He knew she had cast a protective spell of some kind, but he never stopped to ask why it worked, never researched the old magic that Dumbledore clearly understood. If he had, he might have realized that by taking Harry's blood, he was tethering the boy to life instead of ensuring his death. He never investigated the Elder Wand's history either. He believed that simply possessing the wand would make him unbeatable. He assumed that killing Snape would transfer its allegiance. He never asked how wand loyalty truly worked, never studied the ancient laws behind it. He simply believed he had mastered it. But magic does not bend to arrogance. Even simple intelligence gathering could have changed everything. He knew Harry and his friends were hunting Horcruxes, yet he never stopped to consider how they were doing it. He never ordered his Death Eaters to track Hermione Granger, who was the brains behind their operation. Never realized that Dumbledore had already left Harry the tools he needed. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that information wins wars. He could have infiltrated Hogwarts more carefully, gathering intelligence instead of relying on brute force. He could have studied Muggle warfare, realizing that power is often in strategy rather than raw strength. He could have learned how fear affects people, understanding that terror alone does not create true loyalty. Instead, he ruled like a tyrant, believing that knowledge was unnecessary when one had power. That mistake became his downfall. He ignored Narcissa Malfoy's motives, assuming she was loyal. He did not question her when she declared Harry dead. A simple verification spell, a moment of doubt, could have changed everything. But he believed what he wanted to believe. When Snape was at his side for years, feeding Dumbledore information, Voldemort never suspected him, never studied his behaviors closely, never considered why. Snape still seemed to mourn Lily Potter. He was blind to what was right in front of him. Dumbledore once told Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Voldemort's choices revealed him as a man who saw no value in wisdom. Harry won not because he was stronger, but because he had knowledge. He understood the power of sacrifice. He listened, he learned, he asked questions. He surrounded himself with people who could think. Voldemort surrounded himself with people who obeyed. By the time the final duel came, Voldemort was already defeated. Not by Harry's spell, but by his own ignorance. He did not know the Elder Wand would betray him. He did not know Harry was still alive. He did not know how deep the magic he despised truly ran. And so, as his own curse rebounded, as the wand left his grasp, as his body crumpled to the floor, he finally faced the truth. Power without knowledge is nothing. Voldemort never considered the possibility of turning Harry to his side. From the moment he heard the prophecy, he saw the boy as nothing more than an obstacle, a nuisance that needed to be eliminated. But what if he had thought differently? What if, instead of treating Harry as an enemy, he had attempted to manipulate him, to lure him in, to make him doubt everything he believed? Great leaders do not simply destroy their enemies. They turn them, bend them, make them question their loyalties. Voldemort had the intelligence and charisma to do this, but he never used it. He relied on fear, pain, and brute force rather than persuasion. And that was his mistake. The first real opportunity Voldemort had to influence Harry was in the Chamber of Secrets. At that moment, Harry was only 12 years old, still new to the wizarding world, still forming his understanding of right and wrong. He had already seen that adults did not always tell the truth. He had spent a lifetime being lied to by the Dursleys, and even Dumbledore had kept secrets from him. He had seen how Hogwarts treated Slytherins like villains, how the wizarding world feared anything different. Tom Riddle could have used all of this to his advantage. Instead of immediately revealing himself as Voldemort, he could have played the role of the misunderstood genius. He could have sympathized with Harry, claiming they were alike, both orphans, both mistreated, both powerful in ways others feared. He could have sown seeds of doubt, asking, "Why does Dumbledore keep things from you, Harry? Why do they call me a villain, when all I ever wanted was to make our kind strong?" If he had been patient, he might have convinced Harry to question everything. He could have made Harry see the world not as good versus evil, but as a place where power determined who survived. But Voldemort had no patience for persuasion. He revealed himself with arrogance, mocked Harry's parents, and summoned the basilisk to kill him. He made it easy for Harry to hate him. The second major opportunity came in the graveyard during the Triwizard Tournament. Voldemort had succeeded in what no one else had. He had captured Harry, taken his blood, returned to full power. Harry was completely at his mercy. If Voldemort had truly understood manipulation, he would have used this moment differently. He could have spoken to Harry as an equal, pretended to offer him a choice. He could have framed Dumbledore as a manipulator, claimed that the Order of the Phoenix was using Harry as a pawn. He could have said, "Look how they sent you into danger, Harry. Look how they let you suffer. They knew I would return, and yet they did nothing to protect you. Why do you fight for them?" Instead, he chose to humiliate Harry. He forced him into a duel, taunted him in front of his Death Eaters, made a spectacle of his return, and in doing so, he made Harry's hatred for him absolute. He gave Harry no room for doubt, no temptation to waver. He ensured that Harry would fight against him with everything he had. Even in Order of the Phoenix, when Voldemort invaded Harry's mind, he failed to use it wisely. He could have whispered doubts into Harry's thoughts, showing him selective memories, twisting the truth to make him believe Dumbledore was using him. He could have played the role of a wise and misunderstood leader, feeding Harry half-truths until they became full doubts. But instead, he chose terror. He flooded Harry's mind with pain, tormented him, pushed him to the edge of insanity. He made it clear that he was an enemy, a monster, someone to be fought, not understood. The irony is that Harry was more susceptible to doubt than Voldemort realized. Throughout the series, Harry questioned authority, struggled with feelings of isolation, and longed for connection. If Voldemort had played on those emotions, he might have had a chance. He could have pointed out the hypocrisy in the wizarding world, how the Ministry silenced dissent, how Dumbledore kept secrets, how society treated outcasts like werewolves and half-bloods. He could have appealed to Harry's frustration, made him feel like the only way to change things was through power. But Voldemort was not capable of subtlety. He did not understand people. He saw the world in black and white, those who followed him and those who needed to die. He never learned that true power is not taken by force, but given freely by those who believe in you. Dumbledore, on the other hand, understood this perfectly. He never forced Harry into battle. He never demanded loyalty. He guided, advised, and trusted that Harry would make the right choices on his own. And that is why Harry fought for him. Compare that to Voldemort's own followers. They did not love him. They feared him. They served him because they had no choice. The moment things started to go wrong, they ran, they switched sides, they abandoned him. Bellatrix worshipped him, but her devotion was madness, not love. Lucius Malfoy followed him for status, but when it threatened his family, he turned away. Wormtail betrayed him. Snape deceived him for years. Even Narcissa Malfoy, in the end, lied to his face. Not one of them truly believed in him, because he had never given them anything to believe in. Harry, on the other hand, was never alone. He did not rule by fear, but by trust. Ron and Hermione followed him because they chose to. The Order of the Phoenix fought for him because they believed in his cause. Even students at Hogwarts, young, inexperienced fighters, stood against Voldemort because they saw Harry as a leader worth following.
And that is why Voldemort lost.
He had the power to win. He had the intelligence, the resources, the knowledge, but he never understood what made people truly loyal. He never saw that winning a war is not just about strength, but about making people want to fight for you. Had he been capable of patience, of persuasion, of manipulation beyond brute force, he might have succeeded. He might have tempted Harry, swayed him, made him question his path. But he never even considered it. And in the end, his failure to understand people, to inspire loyalty, to turn enemies into allies, was what sealed his fate. Because Voldemort never realized that true power isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people stand by your side when the war begins. Voldemort saw the world only through the lens of magic. He believed that power lay solely in spells, wands, and the dark arts. To him, strength was measured in magical ability and nothing else mattered. This was his greatest limitation, because war is not just about brute force. It is about strategy, deception, and adaptability. And in those areas, he failed completely. He never considered that someone without magic could be a threat to him. He never thought that a simple dagger, a poisoned drink, or a well-placed trap could bring down even the most powerful wizard. He saw non-magical people as insignificant, forgetting that history had shown time and again that those who underestimated their enemies were the first to fall. Voldemort's obsession with magic was his weakness. He spent years searching for ways to make himself immortal, to become the most powerful wizard to ever live. But what if someone had simply locked him in a room without a wand? What if someone had sealed him in a cage, buried him alive, or dropped him into the ocean? These thoughts never crossed his mind because he believed magic was the only weapon worth using. He never considered that Muggle tactics, ambushes, sabotage, psychological warfare could be just as dangerous as the killing curse. He never trained his Death Eaters to fight without wands. He never built fortifications that could withstand more than magical attacks. He assumed that because he was a wizard, he was untouchable. The Battle of Hogwarts exposed this flaw. He expected a straightforward magical war. He believed his overwhelming power would crush any resistance. But his enemies thought differently. The defenders of Hogwarts used everything at their disposal. They did not just cast spells, they used their surroundings, their intelligence, their cunning. They collapsed bridges, sealed corridors, and lured Death Eaters into traps. They did not fight like Voldemort expected them to fight, and that gave them an edge. Neville Longbottom did not kill Nagini with a spell. He used the Sword of Gryffindor, an ancient weapon forged with goblin magic. Voldemort had assumed that his Horcrux was safe because it was protected by enchantments. But a blade, sharp and precise, destroyed it in an instant. The Order of the Phoenix did not rely solely on dueling. They outmaneuvered the Death Eaters, forcing them into disadvantageous positions. They used the castle itself as a weapon, creating collapses, barricades, and diversions. They did not fight for dominance, they fought to win. Even Molly Weasley, when facing Bellatrix Lestrange, did not rely on raw magical power alone. She fought with the ferocity of a mother protecting her children. She used experience, unpredictability, and sheer determination, things Voldemort's forces lacked. Voldemort believed that superiority in magic meant superiority in everything, But magic is only as strong as the one who wields it. He never considered that a wizard with less power but more cunning could outthink him. Dumbledore, by contrast, understood this well. That was why he did not just teach magic, he taught wisdom, strategy, patience. He knew that knowledge, planning, and creativity were just as vital as spells. Even Harry, who was far less skilled in magic than Voldemort, won not by overpowering him, but by outsmarting him. He used information, misdirection, and psychological tactics. He let Voldemort believe he was dead. He let him grow overconfident. And in the final moment, he used Voldemort's own arrogance against him. Had Voldemort studied history, he would have seen that wars are never won by brute strength alone. The most powerful armies have fallen to weaker forces that knew how to fight smarter. Kings have been assassinated by those they considered beneath them. Empires have collapsed because their leaders refused to adapt. But Voldemort did not learn. He never saw beyond his own world view. And that is why, in the end, he was defeated. Not by someone stronger, but by someone who understood that victory comes in many forms. Voldemort prided himself on being above fate, above weakness, above the petty fears that ruled lesser men. He did not believe in love, did not value friendship, and dismissed the idea that anything beyond raw power could shape the world. And yet he placed absolute faith in a prophecy spoken by a half-mad divination professor. The moment he heard Trelawney's words, he did not question them. He did not analyze their meaning or consider alternate interpretations. He simply accepted the prophecy as an undeniable truth, and in doing so, he became its servant. Had he ignored it, he might have remained untouchable. The prophecy did not force him to act. It did not demand that he seek out the child born at the end of July. It was Voldemort himself who decided that this single piece of knowledge defined his fate. In his desperation to control his own future, he instead chained himself to it. Dumbledore understood the nature of prophecies better than anyone. He knew they only had power if people acted on them. That was why he never sought to manipulate the prophecy to his advantage. He did not send Harry out to destroy Voldemort because the prophecy said so. He guided Harry toward the truth, knowing that the boy's choices, not destiny, would shape the outcome. Voldemort, on the other hand, acted as if the prophecy was a law of the universe. He assumed it was unavoidable. He did not even try to sidestep it. Instead of ignoring it, instead of seeking an alternative path, he followed it like a script. By hunting Harry, he ensured that the boy would become his enemy. By attacking him as an infant, he made him the one person capable of bringing about his downfall. By marking him, he gave Harry a reason to fight, a reason to resist, a reason to grow stronger. Voldemort thought himself above fate, yet he let a few words, spoken in a dimly lit room, dictate his entire future. Had he stopped to think, had he considered other options, he might have realized that Harry Potter was not a threat until he made him one. The prophecy had not named Harry alone. It had mentioned another boy, Neville Longbottom, who was born at the same time. But Voldemort did not think to ask why the prophecy was vague. He did not wonder if perhaps fate was not as clear-cut as he believed. He simply chose a target, and in doing so he ensured his own doom. Even later, when he returned to power, he continued to fixate on the prophecy. He sent his Death Eaters into the Department of Mysteries to retrieve it, desperate to hear its full contents. He was convinced that knowing the rest of it would give him an advantage, but it would not have changed anything. What he failed to realize was that the prophecy had no real power over him. The moment he chose to act upon it, he became its slave. His obsession with fate blinded him. He saw the prophecy as a set of instructions rather than a warning, and because he followed those instructions so faithfully, he created the very enemy he feared. Harry did not grow up dreaming of vengeance. He did not spend his childhood plotting against Voldemort. He did not even know about the prophecy until he was 15 years old. Had Voldemort left him alone, Harry might never have cared to fight him at all. But Voldemort could not let it go. He needed control over every piece of his fate. He needed to be the one to dictate how the future unfolded. And in his attempt to master destiny, he became trapped by it. By the time he stood in the Forbidden Forest, facing the boy he had tried to kill, it was too late to change course. He had spent too many years obsessing over a future he had written for himself, and so when his final curse rebounded, when the Elder Wand slipped from his fingers, when the last breath left his body, it was not fate that had killed him. It was his own belief in fate that did. Voldemort did not just seek power, he sought to become something beyond human. To him, humanity was weakness, love, family, friendship. These were distractions, chains that held others back. He believed that true strength lay in casting off everything that made a person vulnerable. But in doing so, he destroyed himself long before Harry ever defeated him. His quest for immortality was not just about living forever. It was about tearing himself away from anything that made him feel. He split his soul again and again, believing that each Horcrux made him stronger. But with every piece he removed, he lost something else. Fear, compassion, joy, even rage, once raw and personal, became cold and mechanical. By the time he returned, he was more shadow than man. He had a body again, but there was nothing inside it. He did not love. He did not trust. He did not care about anything beyond his own existence. Even his followers were not allies, they were tools. Bellatrix Lestrange worshipped him, yet he never saw her as anything more than a useful weapon. Lucius Malfoy served him, yet Voldemort humiliated him in front of others, taking his home, his wand, his dignity. When Draco was ordered to kill Dumbledore, Voldemort did not see him as a person. He saw him as an experiment, a test of loyalty, a disposable soldier in a war he did not expect Draco to survive. And Snape, one of his most trusted Death Eaters, was nothing but a means to an end. Voldemort believed he owned Snape's loyalty, never considering that a man without love could never truly understand one who had spent his life driven by it. He stripped himself of everything that connected him to others. He had no family, no friends, no one who would stand beside him for any reason other than fear. And in the end, that was why he lost. Great leaders build something that lasts. They inspire. They leave behind a legacy that others carry forward. Voldemort left behind nothing. When he fell in the Great Hall, there were no hands reaching out to help him, no followers crying out in despair, no army rising up to avenge him. His name, once whispered in terror, became just another story. Another villain in the history books. Another lesson in what happens when a man destroys his own soul for the sake of power. Dumbledore, though gone, lived on in the minds of those who followed him. His wisdom remained. His values endured. His memory gave people strength. Voldemort was wiped from the world the moment he died. No one built monuments to him. No one carried on his vision. No one mourned him.
That is the true measure of failure, not just defeat, but erasure.
He believed that to be human was to be weak. But it was humanity that gave Harry strength. It was humanity that made the Order of the Phoenix fight. It was humanity that in the end left Voldemort alone, helpless and forgotten. He had spent his entire life trying to outrun death. But death was not his greatest enemy. His true enemy had always been himself. Voldemort's hatred for Muggles was absolute. He viewed them as lesser beings, creatures barely worth his notice. In his mind, the lack of magic made them weak, insignificant, and completely powerless against wizards. But for all his supposed intelligence, he never stopped to consider that Muggles had built entire civilizations without magic. They had conquered lands, overthrown rulers, and waged wars that had reshaped history. They had developed technology and strategies that made them just as deadly as any wizard. But Voldemort, blinded by his arrogance, refused to acknowledge that power could exist outside of magic. His worldview was painfully limited. He operated under the assumption that might was determined solely by magical strength. This belief was what made him so dangerous in the wizarding world. He truly was one of the most powerful wizards who had ever lived. But it was also his greatest weakness. He underestimated anything that did not fit within his narrow definition of power. He dismissed intelligence, strategy, and adaptability as unimportant. He saw fear as the only way to rule. He believed that magic alone was enough to win. This arrogance cost him dearly. Had he been willing to learn to open his mind beyond the wizarding world, he could have been unstoppable. He could have blended the best of both worlds, used magic where it was strongest, and combined it with Muggle advancements where it was not. But Voldemort saw Muggle knowledge as beneath him. He never even considered studying it. This mistake was evident in how he protected his Horcruxes. Voldemort believed himself untouchable, yet he hid his Horcruxes in places that, to a wizard, might seem impenetrable, but to someone who thought outside the boundaries of magic were flawed. Consider his choice of Horcrux locations. The diary was given to Lucius Malfoy, one of the least trustworthy men in his circle, someone driven by self-interest rather than true loyalty. The locket was hidden in a cave protected by magical defenses, but it was still reachable. Creature escaped with it, and Regulus Black was able to take it. The cup was placed inside the Lestrange vault, a location heavily guarded by goblins, but still within the magical world's reach. The diadem was left in the room of requirement, a place accessible to anyone who knew it existed. He could have done better. He could have hidden a Horcrux in a place where no wizard would think to look, deep in a Muggle city, inside a steel-reinforced vault, or even launched into space where no magic could ever retrieve it. He could have used Muggle security measures that no wizard would understand, mixing enchantments with technology to create something no one could crack. But he didn't. Because Voldemort never thought that way, he believed in magic, and only magic. This blindness extended to how he waged war. He relied entirely on magical intimidation, attacking openly, striking fear into the hearts of those who opposed him, and engaging in duels as his primary means of fighting. But Muggles had spent centuries developing methods of warfare far beyond simple brute force. If Voldemort had truly wanted to conquer the wizarding world, he could have used Muggle tactics to do it. Imagine what he could have accomplished if he had studied history. He could have staged silent coups instead of outright battles. He could have infiltrated the ministry not with an open siege, but with political maneuvering, blackmail, and manipulation, things that had toppled entire Muggle empires without a single spell. He could have assassinated key figures in ways that left no magical trace, used psychological warfare instead of brute terror, or turned public opinion against his enemies through subtle means rather than mass murder. But Voldemort never saw subtlety as an option. He ruled through force and force alone. He assumed that if he was powerful enough, everyone would fall in line. He never understood that fear is a weak foundation, that it crumbles when people realize they have nothing left to lose. His Death Eaters shared his ignorance. They dismissed muggles as useless, never thinking that their own arrogance might cost them in the end. They never saw muggle-borns as true threats, despite the fact that some of the most brilliant witches and wizards in history had come from non-magical backgrounds. Hermione Granger, for example, was a muggle-born who outperformed nearly every other student at Hogwarts. She thought differently. She didn't just rely on magic. She used logic, deduction, and problem-solving skills that had been ingrained in her from childhood. She questioned things that pure-blood wizards never did. She found solutions that others overlooked. And in the end, it was that kind of thinking that played a crucial role in Voldemort's downfall. He never considered that people who lived in both worlds, those who understood magic and muggle innovations, would have the advantage over him. He never imagined that Harry's upbringing in a non-magical household might have given him a different way of thinking, a different perspective that allowed him to survive. Even in the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort expected a purely magical war. He did not think his enemies would use anything other than spells to fight him. But the defenders of Hogwarts used every tool at their disposal. They collapsed bridges, set traps, and manipulated the battlefield in ways that he had not foreseen. They did not engage in traditional duels. They fought with cunning, strategy, and unpredictability. Neville Longbottom's victory over Nagini was a perfect example of this. Voldemort had assumed that his snake, protected by enchantments and always at his side, was invulnerable. But he never thought that someone would use a sword, a simple, non-magical weapon, but one infused with goblin craftsmanship and ancient magic, to strike the final blow. In the end, Voldemort was defeated not by a more powerful wizard, but by someone who thought differently than he did. Harry did not defeat him with overwhelming magical strength. He won by understanding something that Voldemort never could. Magic is just one kind of power, and it is not the only one. Harry's victory was not about strength. It was about knowledge, about trust, about recognizing that true power does not come from fear alone, but from wisdom, adaptability, and the ability to see beyond one's own limitations. Voldemort never understood that. He had spent his life chasing magic, believing it was the ultimate force in the universe. He never realized that power takes many forms, that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is not the one with the strongest wand, but the one who knows how to think beyond it. Had he studied Muggle history, had he understood how civilizations rose and fell, he might have realized that every great ruler who relied only on force was eventually overthrown. He might have seen that every empire built on terror eventually collapsed. He might have learned that the strongest leaders are those who evolve, who learn, who adapt. But Voldemort did none of these things. He remained locked in his own narrow vision of the world, convinced that magic was the only thing that mattered. And that is why he lost. He saw Muggles as worthless, but in the end, it was not a powerful sorcerer who defeated him. It was a boy raised in the Muggle world, a boy who did not need to be the most powerful wizard to win, because Voldemort, for all his strength, was weak where it truly mattered. And that weakness, his inability to see beyond magic, was what ultimately destroyed him. Voldemort believed himself to be the pinnacle of magical brilliance. He saw no need to learn from others, no reason to expand his knowledge beyond his own twisted understanding of power. He did not seek wisdom from history, from other cultures, from the experiences of those who had come before him. He believed that his way was the only way, and that arrogance was his undoing. Dumbledore, by contrast, was a seeker of knowledge. He explored the magical traditions of different lands, studied ancient texts, learned from wizards and creatures alike. He understood that true power lay not in isolation, but in the ability to listen, to adapt, to grow. Voldemort did none of this. He dismissed the magical systems of other countries, ignoring the ancient wisdom of places like Egypt, where curses had protected tombs for thousands of years, or China, where magical disciplines had developed in ways far beyond the British understanding. He did not study the enchanting methods of goblins, the spellcraft of centaurs, the deep, unspoken magic of house elves. He dismissed it all as unworthy of his attention. His focus was narrow, dark magic, brute force, destruction. He did not seek balance. He did not explore the depths of magic beyond what could be used to kill, control, or intimidate. He saw only one path to power, and in doing so, he ignored 1,000 others. Had he been willing to study beyond his own arrogance, he could have created magic so intricate, so layered, that no wizard could counter it. He could have used forgotten knowledge to make his Horcruxes truly indestructible. He could have woven spells that no one had even imagined. But Voldemort did not believe in collaboration. He did not seek out thinkers, inventors, or scholars. He surrounded himself only with those who feared him. His Death Eaters did not challenge his ideas. They did not offer insight. They did not question his decisions, because to do so was to risk death. Dumbledore, on the other hand, built a network of minds. He consulted the brilliant and the eccentric. He listened to the wisdom of old wizards and the creativity of young ones. He understood that magic was alive, always changing, always evolving. Voldemort's magic was stagnant. He relied on old spells, ancient curses, the same brute force tactics over and over again. He perfected what already existed, but he did not innovate. His greatest creation, the Horcrux, was not even his own invention. It was a piece of forbidden magic that he simply abused more recklessly than anyone before him. He could have used the Elder Wand in ways no one had ever considered. Instead, he assumed its power alone was enough. He could have studied how to make himself immune to wand allegiance, to override magical bonds. But he never sought out that knowledge. He simply took the wand and expected it to obey. He could have learned from the way Dumbledore led his forces. The Order of the Phoenix was not built on fear, but on trust. They worked together, shared information, created new strategies. Voldemort's army, by contrast, was fractured, built on terror. His followers obeyed because they had no choice, not because they believed in his vision. Even Snape, one of his most valuable spies, was never truly trusted. Voldemort did not ask for counsel. He did not gather his best minds to create strategies together. He simply issued orders and expected absolute loyalty. This lack of adaptability cost him dearly. He fought every battle the same way: overwhelming force, direct confrontation, terror tactics. He never considered misdirection, psychological warfare, subtlety. Dumbledore played the long game. He wove together layers of deception, hidden plans, and quiet resistance. He did not rely on sheer power, but on intelligence. Voldemort, despite all his cunning, never saw the bigger picture. He only saw what was directly in front of him. Harry Potter was his greatest blind spot. He saw the boy as a nuisance, a problem to be eliminated. He never thought of why Harry kept escaping him, why he kept surviving. He dismissed it as luck, as fate, as the work of others. He never stopped to consider that he himself was making mistakes, that his limited thinking was the reason Harry had the upper hand. Had he been willing to study Harry, truly study him, he might have found his weaknesses. He might have broken him with persuasion, deception, or emotional warfare. But Voldemort knew only how to attack. He did not know how to understand. The final battle proved this beyond doubt. Voldemort approached it as he always did, with brute force. He did not predict that his enemies would use every tool available. He did not foresee that Neville would use a sword instead of a wand. He did not prepare for his own forces to crumble the moment his power wavered. He did not anticipate that Harry, the boy he had dismissed for so long, would be the one to outthink him. In the end, Voldemort lost not because he was weak, but because he refused to grow, he refused to learn, he refused to listen to anything outside of his own ego.
A true leader builds on the knowledge of others. A true master of magic seeks wisdom wherever it can be found. Voldemort did neither. And so he fell, not to someone stronger, but to someone wiser.